Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Here in California, we are actually enjoying some really nice weather and the complete end to the California legislative session. That's right. Sunday, yesterday, was the last day for Governor Brown to sign or veto, or basically to take action on any bills that were on his desk here in the state of California. So, what we're going to offer for you today is a little bit of a wrap up on those bills and the things that happened. Now, it turned out to be kind of a mixed bag in the state of California, at least in terms of the bills that actually made it to the governor's desk here in this last week. The first one we'll talk about, well, obviously, there's Governor Moonbeam, and which is really kind of odd because this is a guy who you look at his two terms as governor, and really to a certain degree, this Jerry Brown was more conservative than the original Jerry Brown, but yet and still he still had how shall I say, he still had his issues relating to the Second Amendment. Relating to our bills, in particular over the last couple of years, he really, I don't know, the last year in particular, he's really kind of gone south on us. At one point, he was a pretty reliable, and I won't say reliable, he was at least reasonable when it came to the Second Amendment, when it came to issues relating to firearms. Unfortunately, that reasonableness has to a certain degree gone away. But he's still probably better than just about any other Democrat would have been as governor on firearms issues. So let's talk about some of the bills that he took action on over the weekend. The first one that I wanted to note was AB 7. Now, AB 7 was a bill by Assemblyman Mike Gibson. He's from Carson. This was a measure that eliminated open carry in unincorporated areas of counties. As you know, Senator, then Assemblyman Anthony Portantino, 2011, helped pass a measure that eliminated open carry in the state of California. But what it left was open carry in unincorporated areas of counties. So, in cases for people hunting or things like that, or just really kind of people who are in rural areas would still had the ability to openly carry a long gun. Unloaded long gun. And unfortunately, that is now no more. Evidently, because of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, they wanted to eliminate it in Los Angeles County, which is odd because that's also the county, not odd, but interesting because that's also the county that probably has one of the worst ratios in terms of issuances of concealed carry permits. So now, basically, it is almost impossible if you are a resident of Los Angeles County, to be able, even if you're in the unincorporated county, it's almost impossible for you to be able to exercise your right to bear arms in Los Angeles County. They are effectively seeking to, how shall we say, disarm their citizenry. And, hey, with the help of the California legislature, they are getting it done. Now, mind you, what it does do, though, and this is where there's an interesting dichotomy, is that it does allow for the local the local county board of supervisors to allow for open carry. The problem is once again they have the ability. So in other words, what they're saying is you now have local control in terms of being able to decide whether or not you want to allow open carry. The interesting thing is that there's another bill that the governor signed. And by the way, AB 7 was signed by the governor. There's another measure that the governor actually signed, and that is Assembly Bill 424 by Kevin McCarty. Now, Assembly Bill 424 eliminated local control of school districts to be able to decide whether or not individuals can conceal carry on their campuses. Now, remember, SB 707 passed. They passed SB 707 because they wanted to eliminate the exemption of concealed carry permit holders on school grounds. But they said, hey, we want to allow for local control so that you can make decisions locally in your school district for what makes best for you. 5 school districts out of over 1,000 decided that they were going to pass policies to allow individuals to carry on campus. So because 5 out of over 1,000, we're talking less than 0.5%, decided to do that, well, they decided we're going to take away your local control because you decided to do something that, well, hey, is inconsistent with what we wanted you to do. Right? Sounds kind of hinky to me. But that's what they decided to do. They decided to take away local control. And Governor Brown, who, has been kind of an advocate of local control in education or local control period, decided that he was going to support this, which basically makes him look really kind of bipolar. I mean, it's like, dude, make up your mind. Make up your mind. Either you believe in local control or you don't. You either believe that local people ought to be able to make decisions on what's best in their community or you don't. It's just, this is kind of just makes you look like a hypocrite, Governor Brown. But then again, when it comes to dealing with those on the left, we all know that hypocrisy is kind of their mantra. That is how they are. So let's talk about some other bills. We also had the Republican-backed gun control measure, Assembly Bill 1525 by Assemblywoman Catherine Baker out of the Bay Area, out of Dublin. Catherine Baker carried a bill that basically requires additional signage for gun store owners. It requires additional notifications and signage that now have to be included with every firearm packaging. So we know it's going to increase the cost to gun store owners. We know it's going to increase the cost to gun manufacturers. So who else is going to wind up having to pay the price? Us, because eventually those costs are going to be passed along to us. I don't know what to tell you. That is how it is. What was really kind of disconcerting about this was because, Assemblywoman Baker basically decided that she was going to team up with the Brady campaign in order to carry a bill that's going to basically increase the costs on gun owners. Now, mind you, the good news is that the bill is not as bad as it was because it required a whole bunch of new declarations that had absolutely nothing to do with the law, that had absolutely nothing to do with, it was basically pushing anti-gun propaganda. But thanks to calls from you, thanks to emails from you, that bill got significantly reduced down to what it eventually was. So it's not the end-all, be-all, but I think the very fact that a Republican intentionally went out to try and find a way to be anti-gun, to be anti-Second Amendment, to ally with those who would seek to disarm you, I think that's kind of disturbing. And I think that it's important that we make sure that Assemblywoman Catherine Baker knows how much we appreciate her desire to be seen as anti-gun. And I'll just tell you, she says, well, I'm voting or I'm listening to my constituents. Well, you know what? If you are her constituent, make sure she hears from you. Because evidently she thinks stuff like this is what you want her to do. So if that's the case, give her a call, give her a thumbs up. If it's not, give her a call. Let her know that, hey, you don't appreciate it in your own unique professional way. Anyway, so that's 1525 that was actually signed over the weekend. Now, we also had a measure that was actually vetoed over the weekend. And we actually did have a couple of victories. SB 464 by Senator Jerry Hill. This is a bill that would have mandated some really onerous and expensive security requirements on firearms retailers. I like the idea that we're talking about increasing security, but I'm also believe that we ought to talk about I believe that the market should decide. But secondly, if you feel like you need some sort of government intervention, why not include carrots instead of sticks? Instead, they decided they wanted to do mandates. And the governor evidently didn't agree with the idea of increasing mandates, in particular if it was going to wind up putting firearms retailers out of business. Keep in mind, firearms retailers are how they help facilitate the exercise of a Second Amendment right. Even if you don't purchase a firearm, right, you still got to purchase ammunition. Oh, the other thing that you got to do is, if you're going to do any transfers, it requires an FFL to be able to do that. You can't do that. There's no firearms retailers. If there are no FFLs, how exactly do you then transfer a firearm? Don't know. Not necessarily going to be available. Anyway, so that's actually a very good thing that this particular measure got vetoed. Now, once again, I will give Senator Jerry Hill some credit, because originally when the bill was first introduced, it basically had two options. You either have to get an expensive safe and store it in a safe, or you have to have these concrete pillars put outside of your store, and those were the only two options. He sat down, he worked with firearms advocacy groups, and he expanded it to include a total of 6 options. But in the end, it still wound up to be too onerous, because once again, it included those mandates. But I do have to give him some credit for at least being willing to listen. Now, unfortunately, his version of compromise is the same as most of their versions of compromise. I'm going to take your rights. It's just a question of how much of them I'm going to take. That's their version of compromise. And, fortunately, in this case, well, the governor didn't agree with them on it. Now, one more measure that was addressed over the weekend is by Senator Ricardo Lara. Now, this was a bill that I'm telling you right now, the senator did not want firearms advocacy groups. He didn't want us supporting. He didn't want us to be on there. It's a bill that basically would allow for individuals who have been arrested but not charged, not charged. It would allow them to have their arrest records sealed, right? And here's the reason why we supported the measure, because we all know that you only have to look at it, the last couple of audit reports on stuff like this. The courts don't necessarily do a very effective job of reporting, or locals don't always do a good job of reporting the disposition of all of the cases or everything that comes into their system. Oftentimes, when someone is arrested for something, and let's say they're just released, or there's no charges filed, or the charges are dropped, oftentimes there's not a court disposition of what happened to that case, right? So what does that mean to gun owners? So you go in to purchase a firearm, they run your background check, an arrest pops up if you were arrested but not charged for anything. Mind you, you're not a criminal. But an arrest pops up, but there's no disposition. So what happens to that? Well, in the best case scenario, you are denied your ability to be able to purchase that firearm, and the Department of Justice will do more research into terms of finding out what was the disposition of that case. Now, that's the best case scenario. The average case scenario is you are denied your right to be able to purchase a firearm, and then you've got to go and find out what exactly happened with that case. Why isn't it listed? Why isn't it listed as the charges having been dropped? Because when the charges did get dropped, you just assumed it was all handled and it was done, but it wasn't. So what this allows you to do is to be able to have your record sealed. So at the very least, now mind you, when they go to do the background check, DOJ, that arrest will still pop up, but it will show that the case has now been, the arrest record has now been sealed. They'll know that at least there's a disposition there. So there's something there that will not allow, then there's no reason to delay or deny your ability to be able to purchase your firearm. So anyway, so even though he meant it for other things, even though he meant it for other situations, one of the side effects, one of the fortunate side effects for us, for gun owners, is that it eliminates the delay or the denial of our constitutional right to keep and bear arms. And that was really kind of in terms of there was one other one. And this wasn't a bill that we necessarily took a position on, because the Firearms Policy Coalition, we're not a public safety advocacy group. To be real, we are a firearms advocacy group. But one other measure that you might want to think about is Senate Bill 620 by Stephen Bradford. Now, this was a bill that it removed the mandatory minimum. It gave judges discretion when a firearm is used in a crime. Now, I find this odd, because I don't necessarily know that it's going to equate into less time. All I know is it can only equate into less time. The best case scenario is criminals wind up doing as much time as they ordinarily would have done. That's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario is they start reducing the sentences, or not reducing the sentences, but when it comes to sentencing, they start giving criminals who use firearms in the commission of a crime they start giving them less time. Now, this is odd to me because at a time when they're saying, when we really, if there's anybody we ought to be talking about punishing for the utilization of firearms, it's criminals who utilize firearms in the commission of their crimes. Why we are looking at trying to find a way to reduce their punishments and their penalties. I mean, criminals who are using guns in the commissions of crime, I have absolutely no idea. It makes absolutely no sense, except that it fits the overall narrative. What's that narrative? The narrative is gun owners who want to protect themselves are criminals. We're going to make them criminals through onerous, complicated laws that are going to be very difficult for them to comply with. We're going to make them criminals. Meanwhile, the criminals are victims because of society, because of the system has oppressed them, so they are victims. So we need to ease up on them. We need to let them out of prison. We need to give them shorter sentences. We need to not punish them. They need hugs. That's the narrative. All of that having been said, California legislature is now officially out of session. So we can now have an opportunity to enjoy ourselves, at least know that we are at least momentarily free from the tyranny of the California legislature, as we might say. So with that, let's see if you folks have any questions or comments regarding actions taken over the weekend. Let's see here. Robert says that Jerry Brown is mentally incompetent to make rational decisions to run our state. You know, I agree with you. I agree with you, Robert. But the saddest part is that he's probably the most conservative governor we've had since, I don't know, Pete Wilson. And when it comes to guns, he's probably about as bad as any of the Republican governors that we've had. I wish I could say that Republicans have been much better, but Arnold Schwarzenegger was not good when it came to firearms. He really wasn't. So just pointing that out. Jonathan Jenson says, no one is trying to take your guns. It's just illegal. It's just illegal to ever carry them or use them or own scary looking ones. Right. Oh, by the way, and according to the courts, there is no constitutional right to sell firearms, which means if there's no constitutional right to sell firearms, then there must not be any constitutional right to buy a firearm, because if no one can sell it, then you cannot buy it. There's also no constitutional right to ammunition, right? Clearly, because they're going after our ammunition. They're doing everything possible to go around. They're saying you have a right to own a firearm. We don't know how you're going to get it. We don't know what sort of rounds you're going to be able to put into it. We're going to regulate what kind of firearm it is. Probably eventually they're going to try and regulate us down to single-shot muskets. But they're doing everything possible to make sure that we're not able to actually exercise our constitutional right. And that's why I think that what's going on at the federal level, the fact that we have a Supreme Court that should be in a position now to actually defend the Second Amendment, is so vitally important, because ultimately it is going to be the judicial, it's going to be the courts that are going to be our last line of defense, at least in terms of the government. And then we have Dave Johnson says, every time there is a mass shooting, there is a winner. The winner always is the Gestapo. The winner is always the Gestapo in our government, who takes more and more of our liberties and freedoms. Exactly. That for some reason they seem to be hell-bent on the idea of not letting a good tragedy go to waste. They are determined to make sure that we don't have access to our rights, and they'll use anything that they possibly can in order to be able to take that away. Anyway, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. That's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. We're going to be back later on this afternoon. We're going to be talking about the battle of the day. There's still a lot of stuff going on in Washington, D.C. We need your help. We need you to be active. Remember, like I always tell you, share, share, share. Share these videos. Let other people know what's going on, right? Hook people up with the Firearms Policy Coalition so that we can help you help them fight for our rights. Anyway, have fun. Take care. Enjoy your workday. Stay free.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.